Okay, it took me a second to remember what was happening when we left off, but if I recall correctly, Johnson had written a letter to somebody in, I believe, Scotland, who William Drummond, who was trying to get the Bible translated into a different language, and there was some opposition to this being the Bible being translated into that language by Bible purists, I guess. And Johnson had written in support of translation. And now Boswell is saying, the opponents of this pious scheme being made ashamed of their conduct, the benevolent undertaking was allowed to go on. The following letters, though not written until the year after, being chiefly upon the same subject, are here inserted. Thursday, 21st April 1767. To Mr. William Drummond. Dear Sir, that's my letter. Should I... hold on one second. I just want to check something. Okay. Dear Sir, that my letter should have had such effects on you mentioned gives me great pleasure. Wait, I'm confused because it says he was 57 on one page, and then we're in... So I don't know. There was a part where we enter 1767, but it's not... Boswell doesn't have his usual thing where he says, well, this is 1767 now. He just kind of moved into that year without fanfare. So that's why I'm a little confused here. Unless it was on... No. Yeah, he just kind of skips right into 1767 now when Boswell is 58. Maybe it'll be clearer later on. Anyway, I'm very distracted by that. Dear Sir, that my letter should have had such effects as you mentioned gives me great pleasure. I hope you do not flatter me by imputing to me more good than I have really done. Those whom my arguments have persuaded to change their opinion show such modesty and candor as deserve great praise. I hope the worthy translator goes diligently forward. He has a high reward in prospect than any honors which the world can bestow. I wish I could be useful to him. The publication of my letter, if it could be of use in a cause to which all other causes are nothing, I should not prohibit. But first I would have you consider whether the publication will really do any good. Next, whether by printing and distributing a very small number you may not attain all that you propose. And what perhaps I should have said first, whether this letter, which I do not now perfectly remember, be fit to be printed. If you can consult Dr. Robertson, to whom I am a little known, I shall be satisfied about the propriety of whatever he shall direct. If he thinks that it should be printed, I entreat him to revise it. There may, perhaps, be some negligent lines written, and whatever is amiss, he knows very well how to rectify. There's a footnote here by Boswell. This paragraph shows Johnson's real estimation of the character and abilities of the celebrated Scottish historian, however lightly, in a moment of caprice, he may have spoken of his words. Back to the letter. Be pleased to let me know, from time to time, how this excellent design goes forward. Make my compliments to young Mr. Drummond, whom I hope you will live to see such as you desire him. I have not lately seen Mr. Elphinston, but believe him to be prosperous. I should be glad to hear the same of you, for I am, Sir, your affectionate, humble servant, Johnson's Court, Fleet Street, April 21st, 1767, Sam Johnson. And now written to the same. Sir, I returned the week from the country after an absence of near 6 months, and found your letter with many others, which I should have answered sooner if I had sooner seen them. Dr. Robinson's opinion was surely right. Men should not be told of the faults which they have mended. I am glad the old language is taught, and honor the translator of a man whom God has distinguished by the high office of propagating his word. I must take the liberty of engaging you in an office of charity. Mrs. Healy, the wife of Mr. Healy, who had lately some office in your theatre, is my near relation, and now in great distress. They wrote me word of their situation some time ago, to which I returned them an answer which raised hopes of more than it is proper for me to give them. Their representation of their affairs I have discovered to be such as cannot be trusted, and at this instance, though their case requires haste, I know not how to act. She or her daughters may be heard of at Canongate Head. I must beg, sir, that you will inquire after them, and let me know what is to be done. I am willing to go to £10, and will transmit you such a sum, if upon examination you find it likely to be of use. If you are in immediate want, advance them what you think proper. What I could do, I would do for the women, having no great reason to pay much regard to Healy himself. So footnote here from Boswell. This is the person concerning whom Sir John Hawkins has thrown out very unwarrantable reflections both against Dr. Johnson and Mr. Francis Barber. Back to the letter. I believe you may receive some intelligence from Mrs. Baker of the theatre, whose letter I received at the same time with yours, and to whom, if you see her, you will make my excuse for the seeming neglect of answering her. Whatever you advance, within £10 shall be immediately returned to you, or paid as you shall order. I trust wholly in your judgment. I am, sir, and etc. London, Johnson's Court, Fleet Street, October 24th, 1767, Sam Johnson. So yeah, before that letter, we were back in August 1766, and then Boswell jumped ahead to October 1767, leaving me much disarrayed here. And I guess from there on, we're just in 1767, yeah, so. There you go. I guess nothing else happened to old Johnson or Boswell in 1766. Anyway, getting back to Boswell. Mr. Cuthbert Shaw, I see an account of him in the European magazine, alike distinguished by his genius, misfortunes, and misconduct, published this year a poem called The Race by Mercurius Spur, Esquire, in which he whimsically made the living poets of England contend for preeminence of fame by running. Oh, droll. Prove by their heels the prowess of the lead. In this poem was the following portrait of Johnson. I shall now read some badly rhyming English verse from the 1767. Hooray! My favorite thing. Here Johnson, and it's even better because it's supposed to be funny. Well, maybe it will be. Maybe I'll be surprised this time. Here Johnson comes, unblessed with outward grace, his rigid morals stamped upon his face. While strong conceptions struggle in his brain, for even wit is brought to bed with pain. To view him, porters with their loads would rest, and babes cling frightened to their nurses' breasts. With looks convulsed, he roars in pompous strain, and like an angry lion shakes his mane. The nine, with terror struck, I believe that's the Muses, who ne'er had seen aught human with so horrible a mien, M-I-E-N, mean, debating whether they should stay or run, Virtue steps forth and claims him for her son. With gentle speech, she warns him now to yield, nor strain his glories in the doubtful field, but wrapped in conscious worth, content sit down, since fame resolved his various pleas to crown. Though forced his present claim to disavow, had long reserved a chaplet for his brow. He bows, obeys, for time shall first expire, ere Johnson stay, when virtue bids retire. Okay, that's a poem. Moving on. The Honorable Thomas Harvey, whose letters to Sir Thomas Hammer in 1754 was much read at that time. He was the second son of John, 1st Earl of Bristol, and one of the brothers of Johnson's early friend Henry Hervey. He died January 20th, 1775. Anyway, this Honorable Thomas Harvey and his lady having unhappily disagreed and being about to separate, Johnson interfered as their friend and wrote him a letter of expostulation, which I have not been able to find, alas. But the substance of it is ascertained by a letter to Johnson in answer to it, which Mr. Hervey printed. The occasion of this correspondence between Dr. Johnson and Mr. Hervey was thus related to me by Mr. Beauclerk, our old friend Mr. Beauclerk, or Beauclerk. Quoting, Tom Harvey had a great liking for Johnson, and in his will had left him a legacy of £50. One day he said to me, Johnson may want this money now more than afterwards. I have a mind to give it to him directly. Will you be so good as to carry a £50 note for me to him? This I positively refused to do it, as he might perhaps have knocked me down for insulting him, and having afterwards put the note in his pocket. But I said if Harvey would write him a letter and enclose a £50 note, I should take care to deliver it. He accordingly did write him a letter, mentioning that he was only paying a legacy a little sooner. To this letter he added, P.S. I am going to part with my wife. Johnson then wrote to him, saying nothing of the note, but remonstrating with him against parting with his wife. End quote. When I mentioned to Johnson this story, in as delicate terms as I could, he told me that the £50 note was given to him by Mr. Hervey in consideration of his having written for him a pamphlet against Sir Charles Hanbury Williams, who, Mr. Hervey imagined, was the author of an attack upon him, but that it was afterwards discovered to be the work of a garroter who wrote The Fool. The pamphlet, therefore, against Sir Charles was not printed. That garroter, a later footnote tells us, was William Horsley, in case you were curious. In February 1767, there happened upon... So now we're going back in time from October when that letter was to February, but still 1767. In February, there happened one of the most remarkable incidents of Johnson's life, which gratified his monarchical enthusiasm, and which he loved to relate with all its circumstances when requested by his friends. This was his being honored by a private conversation with His Majesty at the library of the Queen's house. He had frequently visited those splendid rooms and noble collection of books, which he used to say was more numerous and curious than he supposed any person could have made in the time which the king had employed. Dr. Johnson had the honor of contributing his assistance towards the formation of this library, in fact, for I have read a long letter from him to Mr. Bernard, giving the most masterly instruction on the subject. I wished much to have gratified my readers with the perusal of this letter, and have reason to think that His Majesty would have been graciously pleased to permit its publication, but Mr. Bernard, to whom I applied, declined it on his own account. Anyway, Mr. Bernard, the librarian, took care that he should have Johnson have every accommodation that could contribute to his ease and convenience, while indulging his literary taste in that place, so that he had here a very agreeable resource at leisure hours. His Majesty, having been informed of his occasional visits, was pleased to signify a desire that he should be told when Dr. Johnson came next to the library. Accordingly, the next time that Johnson did come, as soon as he was fairly engaged with a book on which While he sat by the fire, he seemed quite content. Mr. Barnard stole round to the apartment where the king was, and, in obedience to His Majesty's commands, mentioned that Dr. Johnson was there in the library. His Majesty said he was at leisure and would go up to him. Upon which Mr. Barnard took one of the candles that stood on the king's table and lighted His Majesty through a suite of rooms till they came to a private door into the library, of which His Majesty had the key. Being entered, Mr. Barnard stepped forward hastily to Dr. Johnson, who was still in a profound study, and whispered to him, "Sir, here is the king." Johnson started up and stood still. His Majesty approached him, and at once was courteously easy. The particulars of this conversation I have been at great pains to collect, with the utmost authenticity, from Dr. Johnson's own detail to myself, from Mr. Langston, who was present when he gave an account of it to Dr. Joseph Warden and several other friends, at Sir Joshua Reynolds's, from Mr. Barnard, from the copy of a letter written by the late Mr. Strathan the printer to Bishop Warburton, and from a minute, the original of which is among the papers of the late Sir James Caldwell, and a copy of which was most obligingly obtained for me from his son Sir John Caldwell by Sir Francis Lumb. To all these gentlemen I beg leave to make my grateful acknowledgments, and particularly to Sir Francis Lumb, who was pleased to take a great deal of trouble, and even had the minute laid before the king by Lord Camerton, now Duke of Leeds, then one of His Majesty's principal secretaries of state, who announced to Sir Francis the royal pleasure concerning it by a letter in these words, quote, "I have the king's commands to assure you, sir, how sensible His Majesty is on your attention in communicating the minute of the conversation previous to its publication. As there appears no objection to your complying with Mr. Boswell's wishes on the subject, you are at full liberty to deliver it to this gentleman to make such use of it in his Life of Johnson as he may think proper." Here we go. His Majesty began by observing that he understood he came sometimes to the library, and then mentioning his having heard that the doctor had been lately at Oxford, asking him if he was not fond of going thither. To which Johnson answered that he was indeed fond of going to Oxford sometimes, but was likewise glad to come back again. The king then asked him what they were doing at Oxford. Johnson answered he could not much commend to their diligence, but that in some respects they were mended, for they had put their press under better regulations, and were at the times printing Polybius. He was then asked whether there were better libraries at Oxford or Cambridge. He answered he believed that Bodleian was larger than any that he had at Cambridge. At the same time adding, "I hope whether we have more books or not than they had at Cambridge, we shall make as good a use of them as they do." Being asked whether All Souls or Christ Church library was the largest, he answered, "All Souls library is the largest we have except the Bodleian." "Aye," said the king, "that is the public library." Now, side note here, let old me tell you, I've been in that Bodleian library when I was in Oxford, and I believe I had lending rights to that place. But I remember when we went in there, we had to swear an oath to take the books out and be kind to the queen or whatnot. And also, I think whenever you got a book out, they had to go on an excavation. Like Indiana Jones had to go into the archives and pick it out of a long room, and it took several days to get anything from there. So I don't even think I don't recall ever taking anything out of there, but I remember being in there, and I don't remember, honestly, I don't remember what it looked like inside. I remember the outside is pretty impressive looking, but I don't recall the inside very much. I think people were wearing robes, but I could be making that up. Anyhow, oh, look at that. It's already 20 minutes, so I'm going to stop for today. We'll continue with the King and Johnson talking in the King's Library some other time, probably tomorrow. Till next time, bye from Boswell.